But so you end up in this situation where you're making a lot of money. So despite the inefficiencies of your business practices and the inefficiencies of your editorial model, you're still able to make a rather incredible profit on a very large revenue. Which brings us to the elephant in the room, which again often doesn't get talked about very explicitly, I think, although it's always there underlying everyone's thinking in this OA world. This is an elephant that Napoleon was going to put into the Bastille, apparently. It would have been the elephant in the Bastille. It's the elephant in the room here. So the elephant in the room, if we look at the STM report, which is a fantastic report, actually, by Mark Ware and Michael May, and they put it out every couple of years, and it's like 100 pages of really dense, great information about the academic publishing world. This is from their executive summary. So the annual revenues generated from English language STM journal publishing were estimated at about $9.4 billion, up from $8 billion in 2008. This is all through the economic crash, of course. This is a somewhat recession-proof industry. There's about 28,000 academic peer-reviewed journals, collectively publishing about almost 2 million articles, so let's say 1.85 million articles. So $9.4 billion divided by 1.85 million articles is a revenue of roughly $5,000 per article. The subscription industry is capable of generating per article. Revenue. If you look at PLOS One, so now we're getting onto the open access stuff. So if you look at PLOS One, which is where it came from, of course, their article processing charge per publication, which, I'm sorry, I'm recovering from a cold, which is effectively their revenue per article. Actually, it's a little bit lower because not everyone pays, is $1,350. So straight away, there's a big disconnect there. $5,000 versus $1,300. Times, if you were to take every article in the world and publish it in the PLOS One model, which PLOS One is conceivably capable of doing, you could do that at a revenue of $2.5 billion. You could publish the world's output in PLOS One for, what's that, a 75% saving compared to what it's currently costing the world. What's going on there? Why isn't that a problem for the world? You know, why hasn't it made that change yet, I guess, is the question. It's such a dramatic savings to everybody. And potentially, you know, the 9.4 billion is being propped up by sort of old-fashioned business practices. So now let's sort of switch tack to what is open access. You know, the Bethesda definition of OA is typically, you know, held up as the normal definition: free, immediate access, deposition in a digital public archive, and unrestricted reuse. Of course, that definition has nothing to say about the business model at all. It's entirely a definition of the distribution model, basically. What tends to happen is that open access, the definition of open access gets conflated with the business model, and the most visible business model is the APC. So, you know, as we all know, this is a room of open access, you know, advocates and experts. There's several ways to approach open access. Of course, there's green OA, institutional repositories, embargoed open access, gold OA. They're made up of things like hybrid open access journals, where an OA article is published within a subscription journal, still hasn't taken off in any significant way. The Born OA open access journals, so these are, as it were, full OA journals. Some people refer to them as. David Solomon, in their recent Wellcome Trust report, started calling these full OA. And they can be funded in several different ways. So these are, in my mind, you know, the interesting end of the market that we can talk about today, at least. But the full OA, Born open access journals, are most visibly supported by their APC fees. So this is PLOS One style model, but there's other models as well. There's no fee. A large number of journals are free, and there's membership fee. So here's the DOAJ. So of the, whatever that is, roughly 8,000 journals have been listed there, actually 9,000. 6,500 of them are free, for example. People tend to forget that. You know, a large number of the journals are actually free. They're just not the most visible part of the journal market because usually they're somewhat small and amateur run, but you know, there is a large number of free journals. eLife, of course, is a very visible example of a free journal with an alternate business model. It's being supported by the Howard Hughes Bank and Wellcome Trust. And then there's ourselves, Peerj. We've sort of invented this publication plan model where you pay once for a publication plan that's good for life. So there are many, well, not many, but there are alternate business models to the APC model. And in the Q&A, we can talk about our model a bit more. I'm not going to go into it too much. I didn't want this to be an advertorial, but I think we do have an interesting take on a nice alternative. But of course, in the world of realpolitik, this is Henry Kissinger meeting Mao Zedong. In the real world, it's actually about the APC. Talk about the most and concern themselves about the most. And in this graph, the APC model is represented by the top slice. The light blue slice is journals that are supported with an APC fee. And this only goes through 2011, this data. But you can see it's a large and growing segment of the total output of journal articles. And we've now moved on 3 or 4 years from that, and actually it's been growing more and more, of course. And it's been growing because of this graph, this sort of unpacks that light blue part, the APC-funded portion of the market. And this was a graph, again, put out by Cameron Nayland. And it's in no ways comprehensive, and actually this graph comes straight off of Figshare. It's marked up there. We're going to hear about Figshare later. But this is a selection of the sort of larger, more prominent APC-funded OA publishers. And you can see, actually, it really breaks down into 3 big publishers. There's Biomed Central at the bottom there, now owned by Springer, Hindawi, who are out of Egypt, and PLOS at the top. And then there's some slices of other publishers. But this is an expanding bubble of APC-funded journals within an expanding bubble of open access in general. So publication fees, APC fees, and one of the best examples is PLOS because they've got a whole range, are the way, the most visible way that OA journals get funded. And PLOS has the range there. If we start from the bottom, it has PLOS 1 at $13.50. It has these 4 journals in the middle that are referred to as the community journals, the CJs, and they have sort of an intermediate price. Then you have the sort of highly selective journals, PLOS Biology and Medicine at $2,900. And the difference in the pricing is because of the selectivity of the journals. If you reject a lot of content, just as in the subscription model, your business model actually affects the way you do business. So if you reject a lot of content and you're only charging people an APC fee for the published content, there's obviously a natural equation between how much you need to charge. And again, what I think sometimes has happened here is that the open access world, because it's born of its history, it's attempted to emulate some of the conceits of the subscription world, and one of those is to have highly selective journals. And so the PLOS Medicines, PLOS Biologies of the world were really a copy of the Natures and Sciences and the highly selective subscription. And it wasn't necessarily necessary, but in order to make it work, and it's very hard to make the finances work actually in that kind of a model, they ended up with these high price points. And then PLOS went through this history of sort of gradually evolving their thinking, and they've ended up with the PLOS 1 model, which is... So if this is how subscription model has affected how publishers operate, what about this fact that open access publishers are also creatures of their model? They're affected by their model as well. They don't necessarily have the perfect model either. But make the point, I think, that the open access model or any model does affect the way you do business. So as I made the point with the subscription world, I can use Peerj as an example as well. We sell individual publication plans for life. So we try and sign up individual academics to publish with us for life for a single fee. So how does that affect the way that we do business? Well, first of all, because everyone is a plan holder, a member, in our system, we know who everybody is in our system. We know every interaction they have. If you look at a normal APC-funded journal, they typically only care who the corresponding author is, because that's the person that's going to pay the APC fee and submit the article and deal with the peer reviews. They only really care about one person on the article, and actually almost don't even collect the metadata properly for all the co-authors. We need to know who every co-author is on a paper, because we charge every single one of them for a membership fee. And they have to log on and come back to us, and you know. As a result, you know, it's in our interest to profile those individuals. Our business model is about getting individuals to come and publish with us. And so as an individual academic, one of the things that you might want to get as a result is to be profiled by your publisher, for us to demonstrate what you did, that you were a good actor in our system, a good player. So we do that. You know, we're sort of meeting the needs of our market via our business model. We end up building tools and services that actually encourage more interaction from those people, giving them a tool and a service that encourages them to become, you know, a participant in the system in the first place, which actually supports our business. So if we look now at the APC business model, which is the article processing charge, and combine that with the concept of open access, what have you got? So the APC model basically allows each unit of output to pay its own way. So every published article has a fee attached to it, and in theory that fee should be enough to pay the cost of the publication of that article. So it scales. You can publish as many articles as you want, provided each article is paying its own way. You can't do that in a subscription world. You know, the scaling is different there. If you published you know, too many articles, you're going to end up with a package, a journal that nobody can afford to subscribe to. It just doesn't scale. But because of that, because each individual article pays its own way, not the entire journal, you don't need to bundle the good stuff with the bad stuff anymore. You don't need to have this journal concept of we've got to collect together this sort of range of stuff, because that's the only way anyone will buy it. Because now people aren't buying the package of content, they're actually paying for the service of publication. And as a result, you know, as a bonus, that means you can now publish stuff that previously nobody was interested in buying. So now you can publish negative results, replication studies, incremental articles, stuff that in the sort of old model nobody would have put into a journal, because the customers, you know, don't want the journal to be basically flooded with the sort of low end of the bundle. So you end up with a situation where the APC model allows you to unbundle your content, and you know, you're now online. So it's an open access business model, and open access is, you know, typically almost entirely online only. But that means there's new forms of discovery, search, Google basically. So you no longer need to create a custom container to find stuff with. So previously the only way to find plankton research was to go to the Plankton Journal. Now you go to Google Scholar and just type in plankton, and it doesn't matter where it was published anymore. So now you're able to unbucket as well. You don't have to bucket content into one place for the purposes of just being able to find it. Another effect here is that the author is now the customer, as well as the producer of content. So in the previous world, the subscription world, you know, the author was the producer of the content that the journals then took and sold to an institutional library. So it was a different customer. The institutional library had their own, you know, masters, as it were, at the back end, which were the authors again, but there was a real disconnect there, well, there still is, of course. The academics and authors in the university world don't know the cost of a journal, so they help to produce it. They demand that their library subscribes to it, but they're actually sort of disconnected from the reality of the cost. No longer the case in a sort of APC model. Now, often, you know, the authors themselves get the bill and even have to pay themselves out of their research funds, or, you know, even out of their own pocket. One of the good things about our own model in PeerJ is that the price is so low, the $99 sort of price point, that people can pay for that out of their own pocket even. It doesn't have to come out of the fund. And therefore, they're even more exposed to the sort of true cost of publishing. So, you know, what does a customer like that expect? And at the same time, what do they expect when they're supplying the product that they're paying for? And this is perhaps the topic of a different talk, but they expect things like tools and services. They expect a speedy peer review process. They expect the journal to look and feel beautiful. They expect to be treated respectfully as a customer, not as you're just a producer. And you really start to see that in the mindsets of the open access journals. They tout their speed. They have beautiful looking websites. They're innovative. You typically don't see any interesting innovations coming out of the subscription. I think their customer base hasn't been demanding in the same way that the individual. So, I'm sorry, through the microphone. So the effect here is you've ended up with a few drivers. So there's the unbundling of content, there's the unbucketing of content, and there's the APC fees per publication, not per submission, for instance, but per. And what that's led to, the end result, is really it's sort of naturally given rise to the mega journal. So the bucketing, for example, there are still many open access journals that still try to bucket, even in PLOS. Journal of Computational Biology, for instance. It's a bucket. But actually, it's an old-fashioned mindset, I think, to have come up with that concept. It's a hangover from the subscription world. There's the unbundling, of course, the aspect, the unbucketing, all of which, it feels to me, just sort of naturally led, sort of logically, to the invention of the mega journal. And it perhaps wasn't very obvious when it was invented. The founders of PLOS deserve, a lot of kudos and credit for having sort of invented PLOS One, basically, and pushed it on the world. But it's been a runaway success, and it almost looks now like it was an inevitable consequence of some of the drivers in the market. So the full PLOS One mega journal model is, it should have an open access model which employs a payment model, and in this case APCs, but it doesn't have to be APCs. But the model should ensure that each article pays its own costs in some way. Scale to an infinite size. It employs editorial criteria which judges articles only on whether or not they deserve to join the literature. So again, you're not artificially introducing inefficiencies into your own system, and as a result, you're removing inefficiencies from the academic system as well, which is great. And the mega journal in particular, so the archetypal PLOS One mega journal, has a very broad subject scope. PLOS One covers the whole of science, in theory. But there's sort of an evolution of the mega journal way of thinking that I think a lot of people have not noticed because they focused on PLOS One. So they've been distracted by the incredible success of PLOS One and the size and the speed of growth. And they've put this label of mega journal on it. And we didn't do that in PLOS. We didn't call it a mega journal. Somebody else, I can't find, my Google skills aren't up to it, but I can't find who originally coined the term mega journal. But it sort of stuck, and I think it's focused people's attention on the PLOS One mega journal phenomenon. And of course, there's an element of that. So there's true mega journals with a very broad scope. There's PLOS One that now publishes 3 or 4% of the literature. And there's been many sort of high-profile launches of PLOS One clones. And we're one of them. We employ every one of those attributes in the definition, but there's many others here, and they've been launched by all the usual players. Elementor, got somebody here from BioOne, BMJ, Open, Sage, Open, Springer Plus, Nature. Most recently, the AAAS have announced their own science advances. The Royal Society, Open Science. There's now many of these sort of what you might consider sort of marquee mega journals that are out there, all trying to emulate the PLOS One success, which is great. The bit that I think everyone has missed, that I started talking about a year or so ago, is not to think of it as a mega journal in a large, broad subject area, but to think of it as the impact-neutral editorial model. So the sort of non-selective editorial model, this concept of only peer-reviewing content to decide whether it deserves to join the literature, and that being the only decision point. So you could take that attitude and apply it still to a more niche subject area. So the Journal of Plankton Research, for instance, you could peer review every single plankton article in the world and just decide whether it deserves to join the literature and still publish it in the bucket, the bucketed journal, open access journal of plankton research. And like I say, I think that's an old-fashioned concept, but it is still a very popular one, of course. There's other good reasons for having a bucket. You've got a community wrapped around it. You've got some standards that perhaps everyone understands that you can apply. But there's actually quite a lot of people that effectively take the PLOS One editorial model and apply it to niche subject area journal titles. And effectively, it's the whole of the BMC series, BMC's past Springer, whole of the Frontiers journal series, and Nature recently bought Frontiers. The ISRN series from Darby, that's a series of journals. But there's actually a very large, absolute number of journals that are sort of flying under the radar and applying this editorial model of publish everything that's publishable, but not describing themselves as mega journals, because perhaps some of them even predate the PLOS One mega journal model. And this group is actually being very successful as well. So you can go and do the data on this, which I did, and actually, again, the data set's up on Figshare if you want to go look for it. But this is the output of PLOS One, which is, again, the big visible thing that everyone's noticed. And it's partly my own fault. I produce a graph like this in every talk I go to. And everyone focuses on it and thinks how dramatic and exciting that is. But if you draw that same graph on a scale of years, this red line is that same graph, the output of PLOS One annually. In 2012, it was publishing 24,000 articles. 2013, it did 34,000 articles. So that's PLOS One. Then, of course, you've got all these other mega journals that have been launched. And they only started launching in about 2011. So even though there's a lot of them, there's at least 30 of them now, they're not contributing a great amount. So the blue line is PLOS One plus all of the sort of Me Too mega journal large single titles. I think there's a lot of space in this graph still. Okay, so this line is PLOS One plus all the mega journals plus all of those other journals. So all of the BMC series, all the Frontiers series, all of the ISRN series in Darwin. So in fact, in 2012, roughly 50,000 articles were being published in 2012 with this sort of impact-neutral editorial model, peer reviewing only for scientific soundness. Everyone's focused on the 24,000 number in PLOS One, but actually the graph is moving a lot faster than even PLOS One implies. In 2013, where was it? I don't have the data for 2013, but it was probably up around sort of 80,000 looking at this extrapolation. So potentially 8% of the literature last year was published with no indication on it as to how good or bad, where in the spectrum of impact it was. And in many ways, that's a good thing, but in many ways, there's consequences to that.